"If you cross that tree line, Luna, the treaty is broken." Marcus roared, his voice cracking like a whip through the freezing rain. "You are mine by law. Turn back." Luna didn't stop. Her lungs burned, her torn silk dress catching on the jagged briars. Ahead lay the Blackwood, a territory no sane wolf entered. It was a death sentence. But death was a kindness compared to the gilded cage Marcus had built for her. "Let the treaty burn," she whispered to the biting wind. She ran into the forest to escape her arranged mate, and without knowing it, ran straight toward the heart of the forbidden territory, straight toward the arms of the Alpha King. She vaulted over a moss-covered log, plunging into the darkness. The forest swallowed her whole. The transition from the manicured, patrol-heavy borders of her home pack to the ancient, untamed expanse of the Blackwood was instantaneous. It was as if she had breached the wall of a soundproof room. The howling winds that had battered her in the open fields were suddenly choked by the dense, towering canopy of centuries-old pines. The rain, previously a driving sheet of ice, now fell in heavy, rhythmic drops, echoing like a heartbeat against the forest floor. Luna didn't slow down. Her bare feet, she had abandoned her suffocating silver heels miles back on the asphalt, slapped against the freezing mud, slipping on slick roots and sharp stones. Pain radiated up her calves, her muscles screaming in protest, but adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit were abruptly severed. She chanced a glance over her shoulder, her chest heaving violently. Through the dense thicket, 50 yards back, she could see the faint, sweeping beams of flashlights cutting through the mist. She saw the silhouettes of Marcus's trackers. They were pacing back and forth along the invisible line that separated the territories. She could almost smell their frustration, the acrid tang of their sweat and anger. But they did not take a single step forward. They were terrified. A grim, breathless laugh scraped its way out of Luna's throat. Marcus, a man who believed the world bowed to his checkbook and his bloodline, had ordered his elite guard to stop. The realization brought a fleeting, intoxicating rush of victory. For 3 months, she had endured the stifling rehearsal dinners, the polite smiles masking political threats, and the suffocating scent of Marcus's heavy cologne as he paraded her around like a prized mare. Tonight, the night of the binding ceremony, she had shattered the illusion. She had waited until the champagne flowed and the guards relaxed, slipped through the conservatory window, and ran. But the victory was cold, and it faded quickly as the reality of her surroundings set in. She turned her face forward, peering into the pitch-black abyss of the Blackwood. The silence here wasn't empty. It was heavy, expectant. The air smelled of damp earth, decaying pine needles, and ozone. There were no marked trails, no ambient light from distant cities. This was the domain of the Alpha King, a man who was more myth than flesh to the southern packs, a ruler who operated outside the council's jurisdiction, governing a sprawling empire of wilderness and wealth with absolute, ruthless authority. No one crossed into his territory without an invitation. Those who did were rarely heard from again. A violent shiver racked Luna's frame. The adrenaline was receding, leaving behind the biting cold of the autumn storm. Her dress, a ridiculously expensive concoction of ivory silk and lace, hung in ruined ribbons, plastered to her freezing skin. "Keep moving," she told herself. "If you stop, you freeze. She forced her legs to carry her deeper. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. The terrain grew steeper, the underbrush thicker. She navigated by touch and the faint, silvery illumination of a moon struggling to pierce the cloud cover. Logic dictated she find shelter. An overhang, a hollowed tree. But panic drove her blindly forward. She needed to put as much distance between herself and Marcus's border as possible, even if it meant marching into the jaws of something worse. An hour passed, maybe two. Time distorted in the dark. Her breath wheezed in her chest, tasting of copper. The cuts on her arms and legs burned with the grime of the forest. The cold had seeped into her bones, turning her joints to rusted iron. She stumbled over an exposed root, her ankle rolling with a sickening pop. Luna cried out, a raw sound that was immediately swallowed by the vastness of the woods, and pitched forward. She hit the ground hard, her hands scraping against sharp rocks as she tried to break her fall. The impact knocked the last reserve of air from her lungs. She lay there in the mud, the freezing rain seeping through her torn dress. She tried to push herself up, to command her arms to hold her weight, but her body had nothing left to give. Her vision blurred at the edges, a dark curtain threatening to close over the forest. Just for a minute, she thought, pressing her cheek against the wet earth. Just rest for 1 minute. Then, the ambient noise of the forest vanished. The dripping of rain, the rustle of wind in the high branches. It all ceased. A new scent rolled over her. It wasn't the damp decay of the forest. It was sharp, terrifyingly clean, and incredibly potent. Cedar, petrichor, and something electric, like the air right before a lightning strike. The ground beneath her vibrated faintly. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy. Luna fought through the paralyzing exhaustion, forcing her heavy eyelids open. She rolled onto her back, her breath hitching as she looked up. A shadow had detached itself from the darkness of the trees. It was a man, towering and broad-shouldered, blocking out the meager moonlight. He stood perfectly still, looking down at her, and the sheer, crushing weight of his presence made the air in Luna's lungs evaporate. The man did not speak. He merely watched her, his posture relaxed, but radiating an apex predator's coiled tension. Luna blinked against the rain, trying to bring his features into focus. He wasn't a feral beast draped in furs, as the southern rumors suggested. He wore a tailored, charcoal overcoat that repelled the rain, dark trousers, and heavy leather boots. His clothes spoke of immense, quiet wealth. But the way he stood, rooted to the earth as if the forest itself bent around him, spoke of raw, unadulterated power. "You are a long way from the manicured lawns of the Sterling Pack," a voice resonated. It was deep, a low baritone that vibrated in Luna's chest, smooth but lined with razor-sharp authority. Luna pushed herself up onto her elbows, wincing as her sprained ankle throbbed. She refused to cower in the mud. She tilted her chin up, meeting his gaze. In the gloom, his eyes caught the faint light, piercing, intelligent, and an arresting shade of amber. "I was going for a walk," Luna rasped, her voice rough and dry despite the rain. "I got turned around." A slow, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. "A walk, in a wedding dress, through 3 miles of briar and mud, straight across a sovereign border." He took a single step forward, the crunch of his boot on the gravel sounding like a gunshot in the quiet woods. "Try again." Panic flared, but Luna locked it down. She had survived Marcus's psychological warfare for months. She wouldn't break in front of a stranger, even if this stranger felt dangerous enough to stop her heart with a look. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said, managing to push herself into a sitting position. She pulled the ruined edges of her silk dress over her knees, aiming for dignity and missing wildly. "Just point me toward the nearest highway, and I'll be out of your territory." "There is no highway," he stated flatly. "Not for 50 miles, and you aren't leaving." The certainty in his voice, sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. You can't keep me here. I'm not trespassing maliciously, I'm just passing through. You breached the Blackwood Treaty the moment your bare foot touched this soil, he replied, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than international pack law. By right, you are my prisoner. Then execute me or let me go, she snapped, the exhaustion fraying her usually impeccable control. Because if you're planning on calling Marcus Sterling to come pick up his runaway bride, you might as well kill me right here and save us both the waiting. The amber eyes narrowed slightly. The mention of Marcus's name seemed to shift the atmosphere, the scent of ozone growing sharper. Marcus Sterling, the man repeated, tasting the name with evident distaste. The aspiring politician. I received an invitation to a binding ceremony tonight. It seems the guest of honor decided to take a detour. I am not his guest of honor. I am a transaction. Luna's voice shook, but she forced the tears back. He bought my family's debts. He bought me. I refuse to be the collateral that secures his seat on the regional council. She studied him, looking for a flicker of sympathy, but his face was a mask carved from stone. He analyzed her, dissecting her words, her micro-expressions, the steady, frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat. Logic dictates, he began slowly, that returning you to Sterling would secure me a very lucrative favor. He is a man who hates to lose. Luna's heart plummeted. She had run from a cage straight to the auction block. Then you're a fool, she countered fiercely, her survival instinct overriding common sense. Marcus doesn't trade favors. He accumulates leverage. If you give me back, you don't gain an ally. You show him you respect his borders more than your own autonomy. You show him weakness. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the leaves. The man stared at her, and then, surprisingly, the heavy, suffocating pressure in the air eased just a fraction. You have a sharp tongue for someone freezing to death in the mud, he observed. It's the only thing Marcus couldn't buy, she retorted. She tried to stand, determined not to have this conversation from the ground anymore. She got one foot under her, pushed up, and immediately her sprained ankle gave out. She pitched sideways, bracing for the harsh impact of the rocks. She never hit the ground. He moved with a speed that defied his massive frame. One moment he was 6 feet away. The next, his arm was banded around her waist, catching her effortlessly. The heat radiating through his coat was staggering, a stark contrast to the freezing rain. Up close, the scent of cedar and ozone was intoxicating, overwhelming her senses. Luna gasped, her hands instinctively grabbing his broad shoulders to steady herself. The fabric of his coat was smooth, but beneath it, he felt like solid iron. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers. The cold indifference in his eyes had fractured, replaced by a dark, intense curiosity. I am David, he said, the baritone vibrating directly against her. And you, Luna, are going to be a massive headache. Before she could process his name, the Alpha King, he was the king himself. The exhaustion finally won. The world tilted, the darkness rushed in, and she slumped against his chest, completely unconscious. Luna awoke to the scent of bergamot and the soft, ambient hum of a central heating system. She kept her eyes closed, her mind struggling to piece together the fragmented memories. Rain, mud, the terrifyingly calm voice of the man in the woods. David. The name echoed in her head. The Alpha King. She cracked her eyes open. She wasn't in a dungeon, nor was she in a rustic cabin. She lay in the center of a massive, king-sized bed, adorned with dark charcoal linens of an impossibly high thread count. The room was expansive and striking in its modern minimalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows made up the entire far wall, offering a panoramic view of the ancient, mist-shrouded pine forest outside. The glass was thick, muting the storm that still raged beyond it. Luna sat up, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. She was wearing an oversized, incredibly soft, gray t-shirt that smelled faintly of the same cedar and ozone she remembered from the forest. Her ruined wedding dress was nowhere to be seen. Her ankle was tightly and professionally wrapped in an ace bandage, and the scratches on her arms had been cleaned and treated with a soothing salve. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet touching heated hardwood floors. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She was deep in enemy territory. She stood, testing her wrapped ankle. It bore her weight with only a dull ache. She limped toward the heavy oak door on the opposite side of the room. She grasped the brushed steel handle and pulled. Locked. "Damn it," she hissed, rattling the handle. "I wouldn't advise breaking that. It's solid core, reinforced." Luna spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. David sat in a sleek leather armchair in the shadowed corner of the room, near a minimalist gas fireplace she hadn't noticed. He was no longer wearing the heavy overcoat. Dressed in a dark, fitted sweater and slacks, he looked less like a mythical warlord and more like a ruthless CEO. Yet, the aura of power remained, pressing against the walls of the room. He held a crystal tumbler with an inch of amber liquid, watching her with those piercing, analytical eyes. "How long have you been sitting there?" she demanded, crossing her arms defensively, acutely aware of how small she felt in his oversized shirt. "Long enough to know you don't sleep peacefully," he replied, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You fight even when you're unconscious." "A habit one develops when surrounded by enemies," she shot back, leaning against the doorframe to take the weight off her ankle. "Who changed my clothes?" "My pack doctor, Dr. Aris. She also set your sprain and treated your abrasions." David set the glass down on a side table. The soft clink commanded the room's attention. "You slept through yesterday and last night. It is currently Tuesday morning." 36 hours, Luna breathed, her mind racing. Marcus will have realized I didn't just get lost on the grounds. He knows I crossed." "He does," David confirmed, his tone dangerously mild. "He sent an envoy to my southern border checkpoint yesterday afternoon, a very aggressive beta who demanded the immediate return of his alpha's property." Luna felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands gripped her arms tighter. "And?" David stood slowly. Even across the large room, his height was intimidating. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at his domain. "I told my guards to send the beta back with a message, that the Blackwood does not answer to the Sterling Pack, and that any further uninvited incursions would be considered an act of war." Luna stared at his broad back, stunned. You didn't give me back." He turned his head slightly, viewing her in his periphery. "Do you want me to?" "No," she said instantly, fiercely. Then her logical mind caught up. "But why? You don't know me. I'm a political liability. By harboring me, you are provoking a man who has half the regional council in his pocket." David turned fully to face her. He closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps until he was standing only a few feet away. The heat radiating from him was palpable. Luna forced herself to hold her ground, looking up into his amber eyes. "Marcus Sterling is a parasite," David said softly, the quiet volume of his voice making the words heavier. He has been testing my borders for 6 months. Accidental hunting parties crossing the line, surveillance drones malfunctioning over my airspace. He is trying to gauge my response time, my pack's strength. He tilted his head, studying her face. And then, his prized acquisition, the woman whose family bloodline carries significant historical weight with the council, runs screaming into my woods on the night he was supposed to secure her. Luna frowned, her brow furrowing. You think I'm a spy? You think Marcus sent me here intentionally to gather intel? No, David said smoothly. A spy wouldn't have abandoned her shoes in the mud or run until she collapsed from hypothermia. Your desperation was entirely genuine. Then why keep me? Because, David murmured, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. You are the one thing Marcus Sterling wants that he currently cannot have. And in the game of power, Luna, leverage is everything. You are no longer his collateral. He stepped back, the intense proximity breaking, and walked toward the locked door. He pressed his thumb against a biometric scanner on the wall beside it. The lock clicked open. You are my guest, David said, opening the door. You have the run of this wing of the estate. Aris will bring you proper clothes. Do not attempt to leave the compound. The woods will kill you if the perimeter guards don't. He stepped out into the hall, pausing before he closed the door behind him. Rest, Luna. We have much to discuss later. Sunlight, pale and sharp, fractured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, waking Luna from a deep, dreamless sleep. The storm had finally broken, leaving the ancient pines of the Blackwood dripping and vibrant green against a slate-gray sky. She lay still for a moment, the heavy charcoal linens wrapped around her, cataloging her physical state. The sharp, blinding agony in her ankle had dulled to a manageable throb, and the biting exhaustion in her bones had been replaced by a tense, nervous energy. She threw off the covers and limped toward the sleek, adjoining bathroom. Sitting on the pristine vanity was a neat stack of clothing, a pair of dark, tailored woolen trousers, a thick, cream-colored cashmere sweater, and clean undergarments that looked suspiciously brand new. Beside them sat a note written in elegant, sharply angled script. Dr. Aris. The trousers have been tailored to accommodate the bandage. Luna dressed quickly, grateful for the warmth of the cashmere. The clothes fit perfectly, which unsettled her. It spoke to a level of surveillance and precision that felt suffocatingly familiar, echoing the gilded cage she had just escaped. Yet, the fabric was devoid of the heavy, cloying floral perfumes Marcus always insisted her garments be washed in. Instead, they smelled faintly of the crisp, ionized mountain air. Stepping out of her room, she found herself in a wide, sweeping corridor, lined with rich mahogany and sound-dampening wool runners. The architecture of David's compound was striking. It was not the rustic, log cabin fortress the Southern Packs whispered about. It was a masterpiece of modern, brutalist design, integrated seamlessly into the natural rock and forest. High, clear-story windows allowed natural light to flood the spaces, highlighting steel beams and raw stone walls. It was functional, deeply private, and fiercely secure. She followed the subtle scent of roasted coffee and the quiet murmur of voices down a sweeping glass staircase. At the bottom, the space opened into a vast, multi-level living area that overlooked a sheer drop into a misty valley. In the center of the room, standing beside a massive, dark granite island, was David. He wore a dark slate button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing lean, heavily corded muscle and a constellation of faded, silvery scars. He was speaking quietly to a woman with sharp features and a white coat draped casually over her arm. Dr. Aris, Luna presumed. When Luna's foot hit the final step, both of them stopped talking and turned. "Good morning," Aris said, her voice warm but her eyes assessing Luna with clinical precision. "I see the swelling has gone down. How is the weight bearing?" "Manageable," Luna replied, keeping her posture straight. She looked at David. He was watching her intently, that familiar, heavy aura of authority rolling off him in invisible waves. "Thank you for the clothes. Practicality dictates you have something other than a ruined dress if you are to be walking my halls," David said smoothly. He gestured to a stool at the island. "Sit. You need calories." Luna approached cautiously, taking a seat. A steaming mug of black coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs and cured meat were slid in front of her. The aroma made her stomach twist with sudden, hollow hunger. But she didn't touch the fork. "I don't like being managed," Luna said quietly, looking directly into David's amber eyes. "I spent 6 months having my meals planned, my steps monitored, and my clothes measured by Marcus. I will not trade one handler for another, even if the new one has better real estate." Aris raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing her face, before she discreetly excused herself. Leaving them alone in the cavernous room, David leaned against the counter, resting his hands flat on the cold granite. He didn't look angry. If anything, the intense curiosity she had seen in the forest returned. "I am not managing you, Luna. I am keeping you alive. You are a human crossing a volatile border without supplies, allies, or a plan. If you view a warm meal and medical attention as manipulation, your perspective is skewed. My perspective is based on survival," she countered, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "You told me last night that I am leverage. Leverage is meant to be used. I want to know exactly what the board looks like before you move my piece." A slow, genuine smile tugged at the corner of David's mouth, entirely transforming his severe face. It was a fleeting expression, but it shifted the atmosphere in the room from a boardroom negotiation to something dangerously intimate. "You are exceptionally logical for someone operating on adrenaline and fear," he observed, picking up his own coffee mug. "Very well. The board is this. Marcus is mobilizing his political allies. He is framing your disappearance as a kidnapping perpetrated by a rogue northern faction. He wants to use this fabricated crisis to petition the regional council for armed expansion into the neutral zone, buffering my territory." Luna's breath hitched. "He wants a war, and he's using me as the inciting incident. He wants the resources in the neutral zone, and eventually, the Blackwood," David corrected, his tone turning dark, the amber in his eyes hardening like resin. "He believes I will either hand you over, proving I am easily intimidated, or I will keep you, giving him the legal justification to strike. He thinks he has trapped me." "Has he?" she asked softly. David took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze burning into hers. "I have held this territory for a decade against men far more dangerous than an aspiring politician with a checkbook. He hasn't trapped me, Luna. He has merely invited me to play. Eat your food. We have work to do." Over the next 48 hours, the illusion of Luna being a mere guest fractured, revealing the intense, militaristic reality of the Blackwood Pack. The compound was the nerve center of a massive, highly disciplined intelligence network, restless and unable to endure another hour of daytime television in her luxurious suite. Luna ventured deeper into the eastern wing. She navigated the quiet halls until she found the source of a low, rhythmic hum of electronics and tense, hushed voices. The heavy oak double doors were slightly ajar. Stepping inside, she found herself in a sprawling, dimly lit situation room. The walls were lined with glowing, high-definition topographic maps and live satellite feeds. About half a dozen individuals, all radiating that same coiled, predatory tension as David, were clustered around a central, illuminated digital table. David stood at the head of the table. He wore a dark, tailored suit jacket over a black turtleneck, looking every inch a sovereign commanding a war room. He was listening intently to a towering, broad-shouldered man pointing at a glowing red cluster on the digital map. "Darker, they are calling them readiness drills, Alpha," the man was saying, his deep voice grating with frustration. "But they are moving heavy transport vehicles and establishing forward supply caches just 2 miles south of the river marker. It's an invasion staging ground. We need to strike the caches tonight. If we strike preemptively in the neutral zone, we validate Marcus's narrative to the council." David replied, his voice a low, calm rumble that immediately silenced the agitated room. "We wait." Luna stepped further into the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The sound was minuscule, but in a room full of apex predators, it might as well have been a gunshot. Every head snapped toward her. The air in the room instantly grew heavy, thick with defensive hostility. The large man who had been speaking took a half-step toward her, a low, territorial sound vibrating in his chest. "Why is she in here?" David held up a single hand. The room froze. His eyes locked onto Luna, analyzing her intrusion. He didn't look angry, merely expectant. Luna forced her hands to unclench, her nails having bitten into her palms. She walked slowly toward the illuminated table, feeling the weight of 6 hostile stares pressing down on her. She looked at the glowing red dots clustered near the blue line of the river. "It's a feint," she said, her voice miraculously steady. The large man scoffed. "And the socialite knows tactical logistics now." Luna ignored him, keeping her eyes locked on David. Marcus is impatient, but he is obsessively risk-averse regarding his public image. He wouldn't stage his main supply lines where a civilian council satellite could easily document an aggressive buildup. Those trucks, she pointed to the red cluster, are likely empty or carrying minimal, expendable gear. David tilted his head slightly, giving her his full attention. "Go on." "He uses a private logistics firm for his personal and political security, a shell company called Aegis Solutions," Luna explained, the months of silently observing Marcus's private dinners and phone calls finally yielding something useful. "They use smaller, unmarked off-road utility vehicles. If I were him, I would use the noisy, heavy transports as a distraction for your border patrols, while silently moving the real, elite strike force through the dense canopy of the Whispering Ridge." She pointed to a jagged, heavily forested area on the map, miles east of the glowing red dots. "It's slower, but invisible from the air." Silence stretched over the room, taut as a wire. The pack members looked from Luna to the map, their expressions shifting from hostility to calculating surprise. David leaned forward, planting his hands on the edge of the digital table. His eyes rapidly scanned the topography of the ridge she had pointed out. He tapped a sequence onto the glass, and a new layer of thermal imaging appeared over the eastern ridge. At first, it was dark. Then, as the filter adjusted, faint, tiny bursts of heat signatures became visible beneath the thick canopy. A collective, sharp breath echoed through the room. "Well," David murmured, his voice laced with a dangerous, quiet thrill. He looked up, his amber eyes meeting hers. The look he gave her was not that of a captor to a prisoner. It was the profound, burning look of a commander recognizing a vital ally. It appears our guest has just saved us from a very costly ambush. He straightened up, the aura of authority snapping back into place, harder and sharper than before. Shift the eastern patrols to the ridge. Silence all communications. We will let his elite force walk right into a bottleneck. As the room erupted into quiet, disciplined action, David stepped around the table, stopping just inches from Luna. The proximity was startling. The scent of cedar and rain washed over her, making her heart hammer violently against her ribs. "You paid close attention in your gilded cage, Luna," he said softly, meant only for her ears. "I told you," she whispered back, refusing to break eye contact. "I was plotting my survival." "Keep plotting," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before he turned back to the war room. "I like how your mind works." The tension in the compound simmered for another 3 days. Luna spent her time reading in the expansive library, occasionally catching glimpses of David moving through the halls with urgent purpose. The dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably since the war room. There was a quiet, electric acknowledgement of mutual respect, a spark of something darker and more magnetic pulling them toward each other. On the 4th evening, the fragile peace shattered. Luna was sitting by the fireplace in her room, reading a thick historical volume when the door chimed. Before she could answer, the lock clicked, and David strode in. The relaxed, confident aura he usually carried was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying stillness. In his hand, he held a sleek, heavily encrypted tablet. "What's wrong?" Luna asked, standing up so quickly her book fell to the floor. "Marcus requested an audience," David said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual melodic baritone. "He used a prioritized council emergency channel. I accepted the call." He didn't offer the tablet. He set it down on the small table between the armchairs, tapped the screen, and stepped back. The screen flickered to life, revealing Marcus Sterling. He sat in his impeccably designed, sterile white office. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, not a single hair out of place. He looked exactly as he always did, handsome, polished, and utterly devoid of a soul. "Ah, Luna," Marcus said, his voice dripping with artificial warmth that made her skin crawl. "I was beginning to worry the northern savages had eaten you. I'm so relieved to see you looking well, if a bit disheveled." Luna felt David step closer, his physical presence a solid, grounding heat at her back. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice tight. "I want my bride to come home." Marcus sighed, as if dealing with a difficult child. "This little rebellion has been terribly inconvenient, darling. The council is quite distressed by your erratic behavior. However, I am a forgiving man." "I am never coming back," Luna stated, the words tasting like iron and victory in her mouth. "Your ambush failed. Your political play is falling apart. You have no leverage left." Marcus's polite smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned obsidian black. He leaned closer to his camera. "Oh, my sweet, naive girl. I am a businessman. I always diversify my assets." He picked up a piece of heavy parchment from his desk and held it to the camera. It bore the heavy wax seal of the Regional Banking Authority. "I knew you were flighty, Luna. So, the morning of our ceremony, I expedited the acquisition of your family's remaining debts. All of them, including the medical loans for your grandfather's specialized care facility." Marcus tapped the paper. "If you are not back within my borders by midnight tomorrow, I will foreclose on the estate, and your grandfather will be transferred to a state-run minimum care ward. Given his condition, I doubt he would survive the month." The air violently left Luna's lungs. The room spun. The image of her frail grandfather, the man who had raised her when her parents died, being thrown into a sterile, underfunded facility, hit her like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just built a cage around her. He had built one around the only person she loved. You... Luna choked, gripping the back of the armchair to stay upright. You are a monster. I am pragmatic, Marcus corrected smoothly. He shifted his gaze off screen, clearly looking at David. Alpha King, you have until midnight tomorrow to return my property to the southern checkpoint. If she is harmed or delayed, I will ensure the Sterling family's ruin is complete, and I will blame your pack for the distress that caused it. The screen went black. The call disconnected. The silence in the room was deafening, save for Luna's ragged, shallow breathing. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a cold, hollow despair. All her running, all her plotting, it was useless. I have to go back, she whispered, her voice breaking. Tears, hot and humiliating, spilled over her lashes. I have to pack. I need to leave now. She turned blindly, but before she could take a step, large, impossibly warm hands caught her shoulders. David turned her around, his grip firm but entirely gentle. Look at me, he commanded softly. Luna squeezed her eyes shut, unable to bear the pity she expected to see. David, please. He'll kill him. He'll kill my grandfather without laying a finger on him. Luna, look at me. The vibration of his deep voice in his chest commanded obedience. She opened her eyes. There was no pity in David's amber gaze. There was absolute terrifying fury, banked tightly behind iron control. He stepped into her personal space, his hands sliding from her shoulders to cup her face. His thumbs gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of shock through her panicked system. You are not going back to that parasite, David murmured, his face inches from hers, his breath warm against her skin. Do you understand me? You are not a pawn to be traded anymore. But my grandfather? I govern a territory with resources Marcus Sterling couldn't fathom in his wildest dreams. David interrupted, his eyes boring into hers, conveying a promise that felt as old and unbreakable as the forest outside. I will have my financial operatives acquire the facility your grandfather is in by morning. We will move him to my private compound in the Western Mountains. Marcus will not touch a single hair on his head. Luna stared at him, stunned into silence. Why? Why would you do that for me? It's millions of dollars. It's... David's gaze dropped to her lips again, the anger in his eyes melting into something profoundly intense and possessive. He didn't answer with words. He slowly, deliberately, lowered his forehead to rest against hers. It was an achingly tender gesture from a man forged in violence. Because, David breathed, the scent of ozone and cedar enveloping her. You ran into my forest, Luna. And what belongs to the Blackwood, I protect. The war room was bathed in the sterile blue light of the digital mapping table. It was 3 a.m, 14 hours before Marcus's deadline, and the air in the room was pulled tight enough to snap. Luna stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes fixed unblinkingly on a pulsing green dot on the screen. It represented Echo Team, David's elite extraction unit, currently navigating the airspace just outside the state-run medical facility, where her grandfather was held. David stood beside her, a headset resting over one ear. He had traded his suit for tactical black utility gear, the stark, utilitarian clothing highlighting the dangerous, predatory grace he possessed. He hadn't left her side since the call with Marcus. Echo 1, you are a go for breach, David commanded, his voice a low, steady rumble that anchored the nervous energy in the room. Non-lethal force preferred. The target is fragile. We secure the package, and we vanish. Copy that, Alpha. Commencing blackout in 3, 2, 1. The audio feed crackled, followed by a heavy, static silence. On the screen, the power grid overlay for the facility blinked out. Luna pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. What if Marcus has guards stationed inside his room? What if the stress of the move triggers his heart condition? Breathe, Luna, David murmured, stepping closer until his arm brushed hers. Echo Team travels with a premier cardiac specialist. They have a mobile intensive care unit waiting on the tarmac. As for Marcus's guards, my men are professionals. They deal in silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Luna's heart hammered against her ribs, the rhythmic thud deafening in her own ears. The sheer scale of what David was risking for her. Deploying a sovereign military team into civilian territory, executing a hostile financial takeover of a medical facility in the middle of the night, was staggering. Why? She whispered, her eyes still glued to the screen. You said you protect what belongs to the Blackwood. But I don't belong to you. I'm just a refugee who ruined your carpets. David turned his head to look at her. The blue light cast sharp shadows across the severe angles of his face. You stopped being a refugee the moment you stood in this room and saved my men from an ambush. You proved your loyalty to this pack before you ever owed it. In the Blackwood, loyalty is reciprocated with blood and iron. He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. And, on a personal level, I despise men who use the frail as leverage. Before Luna could dissect the heavy, unspoken weight behind his words, the comms crackled back to life. Alpha, we have the package. Vitals are stable. Dr. Vance has him sedated and monitored. We are airborne. A collective breath left the room. Luna's knees buckled. David caught her instantly, his strong arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his side to keep her upright. He didn't let go, and for the first time in her life, Luna didn't pull away from the overwhelming proximity of a dominant alpha. She leaned into him, burying her face in his shoulder, a ragged sob of pure, unadulterated relief tearing from her throat. He's safe, she cried softly into the dark fabric of his vest. He's really safe. David's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers threading through her hair in a soothing, rhythmic motion. He is safe, Luna. He is currently crossing into Western Blackwood airspace. The financial transfer of the facility clears at dawn. Marcus owns nothing. He held her there in the war room, surrounded by his generals and tactical officers, completely unbothered by the display of vulnerability. The scent of ozone and cedar wrapped around her like a physical shield. Now, David said, his voice dropping an octave, the lethal edge returning with terrifying precision. We have an appointment to keep at the southern border. The rain had returned by midnight, a cold, relentless drizzle that slicked the asphalt of the southern border checkpoint. The neutral zone bridge spanned a raging river, serving as the physical dividing line between the untamed Blackwood and the manicured, heavily militarized Sterling territory. Marcus Sterling stood beneath a large black umbrella held by a shivering subordinate. He wore a pristine trench coat, checking a platinum watch on his wrist. It was 11:55 p.m. Behind him, 3 armored SUVs idled, their headlights cutting through the fog. 4 armed guards stood at attention, projecting an aura of aggressive confidence. She always was dramatic. Marcus sneered to his second-in-command. But she knows what happens to the old man if she's late. Across the bridge, Headlights pierced the darkness. A single, massive, matte black vehicle rolled out of the tree line and stopped exactly on the center marker of the bridge. Marcus straightened, a victorious smile stretching across his face. He stepped forward, expecting the rear door to open and a terrified Luna to step out into the rain. Instead, the driver's side door opened. Heavy boots hit the wet pavement. David emerged alone. He didn't carry an umbrella. The rain seemed to simply sheet off his dark coat as he walked with terrifying, unhurried purpose to the center line. His amber eyes glowed with a predatory light in the darkness. Marcus's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it with a look of bored irritation. "Alpha King, you are cutting it close. Where is my bride?" "Luna is resting," David replied, his voice carrying effortlessly over the sound of the rushing river. "She found the accommodations in my territory, far superior to yours." Marcus's eyes darkened. "Then you have chosen war, and you have condemned her grandfather. I will make the call right now." He reached into his coat pocket for his phone. "You can make the call," David said, his tone conversational. "But you will find the facility under new management. I bought the hospital, the medical debt, and the surrounding land at 6 a.m. this morning. Your foreclosure order was shredded 9 hours ago." Marcus froze, his hand half out of his pocket. A flicker of genuine panic crossed his polished features. "That's impossible. The bureaucratic red tape alone." "I am the red tape, Sterling," David interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal purr. He reached inside his own coat and pulled out a thick, waterproof dossier, tossing it onto the wet asphalt at Marcus's feet. "I also took the liberty of looking into a shell company, Aegis Solutions." Marcus visibly recoiled. The umbrella holder beside him shifted nervously. "You see?" David continued, pacing slowly along the dividing line like a caged tiger. "When Luna realized you were using heavy transports as a distraction to move elite forces through the Whispering Ridge, she provided me with an excellent tactical advantage. But she also provided a paper trail. Aegis Solutions is an unregistered mercenary firm funded by embezzled Sterling Pack accounts. You have no proof." Marcus spat, his voice losing its smooth cadence. "That is fabricated council propaganda." The regional council auditors disagreed, David said, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. "They raided Aegis headquarters in the capital 3 hours ago. They found the manifests, the illegal weapons caches, and the direct financial links to your personal accounts. You aren't inciting a war, Marcus. You are under investigation for high treason." "Liar!" Marcus roared, abandoning his polished facade. He lunged forward, but his guards hesitated, terrified of crossing the boundary line into David's reach. "Check your phone, Marcus," David suggested softly. "I imagine your political allies have been trying to reach you all evening to distance themselves." With trembling hands, Marcus pulled out his phone. The screen was lit up with dozens of missed calls, urgent messages, and emergency alerts from his legal team. The blood drained entirely from his face. His empire, built on intimidation and debt, was collapsing in real time. "She was mine," Marcus whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. "She was never yours," David corrected, his voice ringing with absolute, final authority. "She is under the protection of the Blackwood. If you or anyone acting on your behalf so much as looks at her again, I won't use lawyers to end you. I will use my teeth. Do we understand each other?" Marcus didn't answer. He stood shivering in the rain, a broken, ruined man. David turned his back on the enemy and walked to his vehicle. The game was over. The king had won. The morning sun crested the jagged peaks of the Blackwood Mountains, flooding the compound's expansive eastern terrace with warm, golden light. The storm had finally passed, leaving the forest smelling intensely of pine and fresh earth. Luna sat at a small wrought-iron table on the terrace, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Beside it sat an open tablet. She had just finished a 30-minute video call with her grandfather. He looked tired, but the color was returning to his cheeks. He was resting in a sunlit suite overlooking a pristine alpine lake at David's Western Sanctuary, attended by private nurses who treated him with actual reverence. For the first time in a year, the crushing weight on Luna's chest was completely gone. She could breathe. The heavy glass door slid open, and David stepped out onto the terrace. He had changed into a simple gray Henley and dark jeans, looking exhausted but deeply at peace. He walked over to the stone balustrade, leaning his forearms against it as he looked out over the endless expanse of his territory. Luna watched him in silence for a moment, admiring the strong, clean lines of his profile. She stood up and walked over to join him, leaning against the cold stone by his side. "He's asleep," she said softly. "My grandfather. He told me to thank the terrifying giant who bought his hospital." A low chuckle vibrated in David's chest. "He is welcome. Dr. Vance assures me he will have a full and comfortable recovery." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the tense, heavy silence of the war room. It was peaceful, comfortable. "I watched the news feed," Luna murmured, staring out at the trees. "Marcus was formally stripped of his alpha title this morning. He's facing decades in a council penitentiary. You dismantled him completely." "He built his house on sand," David replied, turning his head to look at her. "I simply invited the tide in." He shifted his stance, turning his body fully toward her. The casual atmosphere shifted, replaced by a sudden, intense gravity. "The threat is neutralized, Luna," David said, his voice quiet and achingly gentle. "Your debts are cleared. The medical facility is fully funded in perpetuity. You are entirely free." Luna looked up into his amber eyes, her heart beginning a slow, heavy rhythm. "Free to do what?" "Whatever you wish," he said, though there was a tight, controlled tension in his jaw. "If you want to return to the capital, I will arrange secure transport. If you wish to travel overseas, my accounts are at your disposal. You are a free woman. You have no handlers, no cages, and no obligations." Luna stared at him, realizing the magnitude of what he was offering. He was giving her everything she had run into the forest to find, and he was asking for absolutely nothing in return. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David went entirely still. The ambient sounds of the forest seemed to drop away. "Luna, do not say that out of gratitude. I do not want your gratitude." "It isn't gratitude," she said, taking a deliberate step closer to him. She reached out, her small, pale hand resting against the solid warmth of his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it thundering against her palm. "I spent my whole life being told where to stand, who to smile at, what to wear. When I ran into your forest, I was looking for a place to survive. But standing here, with you, I think I found a place to live." David closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, a harsh breath escaping his lips. When he opened them, the iron control he always maintained was gone, replaced by a raw, burning devotion. He lifted his hands, gently framing her face. "The Blackwood is not an easy place to live. It is wild and it is dangerous." "So am I." Luna smiled, a fierce, genuine smile that reached her eyes. I figured out the Aegis supply lines, didn't I? You did, David murmured, a breathtakingly tender smile finally breaking across his severe features. He leaned down, bridging the final gap between them. When his lips met hers, there was no hesitation, no political maneuvering, and no fear. It was a promise, solid and enduring as the ancient pines surrounding them. Luna kissed him back, tangling her fingers in the soft hair at the nape of his neck, anchoring herself to the man who had torn down her cage and offered her a kingdom instead. She had run into the darkness expecting to find monsters, but she had found her true north instead. Thank you for reading She Ran into the Forest to Escape Her Arranged Mate and Ran Straight into the Arms of the Alpha King. If Luna's journey from a pawn in a political chess match to a fierce strategist beside her Alpha King kept you on the edge of your seat, we want to hear from you. Please like this story, share it with your fellow romance and suspense readers, and subscribe for more thrilling, character-driven fiction. What was your favorite twist? Let us know in the comments below, and stay tuned for our next cinematic adventure.